antiquity. We move to the Middle Ages today. Okay? We move to the Middle Ages. Why do we call Middle Ages Middle Ages? Because it's in the middle between antiquity and modernity. So it's important that you understand that we, European civilization, Western civilization, we divide our history into antiquity, Middle Ages, modernity, and then we have the contemporary history. But before, let's recap about antiquity. To see it, we address the two main civilizations in ancient times, which are the Greeks and the Romans. We started with the Greeks because the Greeks, we consider that they invented politics. Why they invented politics? First of all, because they started to live in the polis, which is a self-governed community. Politics come from polis. Policy was the city-state, which was a community organized to be self-governed. In which people for the first time they try to, instead of depending on the kingship, on the domain of an emperor, of a tyrant, of a despot, of a strong monarch, they started to say, we want to decide ourselves how to govern, and so they also started this ancient form of democracy. We went through three thinkers in ancient Greece: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Plato was the student of Socrates, and Aristotle was the student of Plato. So they worked together, but they have different ideas. Socrates, we consider the founding father of Western political philosophy. Why? Because at this time, they were studying a lot, but they were focusing on nature, on mathematics, physics, on observing the nature. Socrates was the first one who started to, an investigation, a study, a theory on the problem of society, on the problem of government. So it was the founding father of Socrates, was the founding father of philosophy. So what is the most important book written by Socrates? No book. He didn't write any book because we know him only for what his student Plato wrote about us. And the most important thing that we have to remember about Socrates is his trial, is the fact that he was trying to educate it, to promote critical thinking in the youth, to have a conversation in the youth with open questions in which should be the best form of government, and they discuss. The Socratic method is, critical thinking, open questions. Is the idea that you start from saying, I know that I don't know, I know that I'm ignorant, and so I want to improve my knowledge, Socratic method. So he was accused to corrupt the youth, because he was criticizing the traditions. He got this trial, and at the end of this trial they say, yeah, you're guilty of corrupting the youth, now you decide, we condemn you to death by drinking poison. But we also give you the choice, you can go exile away from the city, or you can do a public, excuse, say, yeah, I'm guilty, but I apologize, I will not do it anymore. And Socrates say, yeah, no, I will drink the poison because I believe that you have to respect the law of your community even when they're wrong, even when you disagree. This is the political obligation, This means that you act not in your private interest, but in the interest of the political community to which you're a member. How do we call when you are a member, the membership of a political community? Citizenship. So this is the first concept we're gonna bring home and remember from the ancient that was invented from the Greeks. Citizenship, which come with two things. Citizenship. It's like a membership. It's like a card of a club when you're gonna go dancing in the night. So with this card, with this membership card, you get two things. when you get citizenship.
Duties and rights.
Exactly. You get rights, you get duties. Okay? Nowadays we mostly focus on the rights of citizenship, which is the right to vote, the right to have a fair trial, and even social rights. Citizens, the right to healthcare, the right to education, the right to housing, the right to public assistance, and so on. So this is why there are huge migration of people who want to get citizenship in countries who offer, better conditions, better rights, and so on. The ancients were focusing much more on the duties of citizenship, which was, first of all, you have to be ready to fight for your community. Nowadays, the political community of the citizenship is the nation state. In the ancient time, this was linked to our urban community, the city-state, the polis. You belong to the polis and you have to be ready to fight for the polis. So as a citizen, you have the right to bear arms. Why? Because because the state is yours, it doesn't belong to a monarch. It's a thing that belongs to anybody. It's a common good of anybody. It's a public thing. Res publica, republic. Republic is the most important notion we have to remind from, the ancient political thought, which is republicanism. It's still existing nowadays. What does it mean, republic? It's a political doctrine that emphasizes the need to participate, to actively participate in the political life of the community. It's different from democracy, because democracy emphasizes equality. We all have to be equal, we all have to have the right to vote and to decide and so on. Republicans say, no, if you're more active, you should be more important in the political community. And, it's a political ideology who emphasizes participation, who emphasizes civic virtues, to be a good citizen, to act for your community, If there is garbage everywhere in the streets, the democratic, call the state and say, please get the mayor, the state, the political authority and say, could you please send, the people to clean up, the public service to clean up? The Republican goes and say, okay, let's meet everyone here in the neighborhood, and let's organize a group that cleans up our streets, because our streets belong to all of us, and it's our duty to actively participate in the life of our streets and to get up and clean up. So this is republicanism, participation, civic virtue, citizenship, virtue, and republic. These three concepts from the ancient political thought. So Plato and Aristotle we use to see the fourth very important political concept. We have to remind the distinction between idealism and realism. So idealist theory is based on ideas. Idealist theory is based on the ideas. So Plato was saying, first comes the ideas. Okay? Like you are in front of me, and I can say that you're students because I have the idea of a student in my mind. Person in his early 20s, go to the classes every morning and go to the classes at 9 and they arrive at 9 o'clock at the class, they attend all the lectures and they study and they get the exam. So I had this abstract idea of the student. So thanks to this idea, I can say that you're a student, you're a student, you're a student, you're a student, you're a student. You're all imperfect embodiment of this perfect idea of the students that I had, because you don't arrive at 9, you don't get 30 at the final, you don't come to all the classes, and blah, 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 blah. I have the perfect idea of the students, and then thanks to this perfect idea, they can say that you are students, right? So idealism, first you have ideas, and then like you donate in the class as a student, perfect student, you don't eat a sandwich in the class. Then in effect, in reality, you have students who eat. So Plato said, you have this idea in general, it's abstract. First, there is an idea, and then there is the reality, but you can recognize the reality only because you have these ideas. So, what does it brings in terms of political organization of society? That Plato was saying, since to acknowledge reality, to know reality, you have to know the ideas first. He was promoting a society, a republic in which all the power is in the hands of the philosopher kings. Because only the philosopher kings know the ideas, because they are educated, and so they are the only one who are able to, really recognize what is the public interest of everybody and rule in the public interest of society. This is still that we still nowadays have this idea, which is our politicians, they're ignorant. Our politicians, they're not good, so we should give the power to those who know the science. We should give the power to technicians, And so every time there is a crisis, for example in Italy, but then in many other countries, you say, okay, we do an interim government led by a good economist, by the rector of a very famous university, by the former governor of the central bank. So we shift from a political government to a technical government to fix the problems, So we still have this idea of the philosopher kings, so only the best can rule. This is also the idea of aristocracy. Aristocracy means crassy government, but Aristos, the best ones. Aristotle, founding father of realism. The truth is in reality, it's not in the ideas. You have to focus on the reality, how things work, and you have to focus on the nature, on the observation of the nature. So this is why Plato we can consider a founding father of political philosophy, political theory, because he was a theorist, whilst Aristotle is founding father of political science, because he's an empiricist. So Plato made a theory, philosopher kings, and Aristotle went to all the 159 states in ancient Greece and said, I do this observation. And from this observation, he decided then these states, they were governed mostly in 3 ways. There were 3 ways of governing the polis, which were monarchy, aristocracy, and politics. This depends on the number of people who are in charge of governing. One ruler, you have monarchy. Few rulers, you have the aristocracy, the government of the best, and many rulers, you have politics. These are good. We say there is not one which is better. The problem is, this is the situation when the governor acts with virtue, with civic virtue, with political virtue. This means that they govern in the interest of society, in the public interest, in the common interest. But then they can degenerate when they rule in their own private interest. So monarchy becomes tyranny, aristocracy becomes oligarchy, and politics becomes democracy. Neither Plato nor Aristotle like democracy, because they say democracy, you give all the power to the people, but then the majority of the people, just want to be free, just want to enjoy. They're ignorant, they're not educated, so it's not the best form of government. The best form of government is a mix between these 3, Aristotle said. All these three forms, when they rule in the public interest, have very good things. So we have to find a mixed form of government. This was the philosophical idea of Aristotle. So, who made these theoretical ideas of Aristotle of the 3 forms of government that we should mix them? Who made them real and really build political institutions based on these ideas? So, the Roman Republic established a situation, institutional situation. You have the mix of these 3 forms of government. The Roman Republic. So we move from Greece to Rome. Romans, they didn't make big ideas, but they make strong laws, strong institutions, strong military situation. And so they try to combine, the three things: the monarchic element by having two consuls to rule for 1 year, not to concentrate too much power. the aristocratic element, which is the Senate, which is the Senate, what we call the aristocracy, of the Roman aristocracy, and with the tribunes who represent, the people, the working class, the lower classes, who had the right to veto, and everything that we saw yesterday. Right? Okay. So this is a short recap, not that short, but a short recap on antiquity. We are interested in the fact that at a certain moment, the Germans came from the north of Europe and they invaded the Roman Empire. All this part was the Roman Empire, but these we call them barbarians, the Germanic population, they invaded the Roman Empire and they destroyed the Roman Empire. Slowly the Roman Empire got destroyed, and these are symbolic dates. The Attila attacked Rome in 452 after Christ, Annus Domini, and in 476 the last Western Roman emperor, a 15 years old boy named Romulus, was killed by this German world lord Odovaker. Okay, so the fall of the Roman Empire marks the end of antiquity, the end of ancient civilization. What do we have after the end of antiquity?
Middle Ages.
Good, very good. So Middle Ages is the period in the middle between antiquity and modernity. It lasts 1,000 years, from 400 after Christ to 1,400 after Christ. 1,000 years is a lot. It's a lot. Let's say the antiquity had these two big political institutions who define the antiquity, which are the Greek polis and the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. Okay? So, with the end of the Roman Empire, we have the end of antiquity. So in antiquity, the period of antiquity, the Roman Empire was the biggest political institution of the time. Then after the fall of the Roman Empire, we have a new big institution, which is now 2,000 years old, that started to grow and to become very important. Which is this political institution who took power during all the Middle Ages?
Roman Catholic.
Yeah, the Roman Catholic Church. We have this guy, the founding father of the Roman Catholic Church. What was his name?
Jesus.
Jesus Christ. Okay, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, he was a political philosopher somehow, so it's relevant because he said things that are still very relevant for political philosophy. Jesus Christ, he was born in
Jerusalem.
Zero. So in zero, Jesus Christ was born. This had really important political implication because he didn't write a book of political philosophy, but his students, they wrote the Evangelists, which are very important novelties for the following 1,000. Till nowadays, it's very important. So, what is new? Why Jesus Christ was saying something so important? Christianity took the idea of citizenship and made it universal. Universal citizenship, because the first time he said any human being can become part of Christian citizenship, of Christendom, of Christians, So Christianity has a revolutionary message because it was the first form of Christian citizenship, and even those who could never be citizens, the slaves, could enter this citizenship, this kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, So Jesus Christ was born in zero. He started this predication. People say this is very something new. He started to have, people who followed the ideas of Jesus Christ, and they were persecuted very much. They were persecuted very much by the Roman Empire. They started to kill them. And they were saying, okay, kill me. I believe I'm going to go to heaven, so you can kill me. Very new thing, because nobody, it was very revolutionary for this kind of situation. Let's say this is for 4 centuries they were persecuted. You're Christian, very good, we kill you. But they kept being Christian, until 3013, when the Roman Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity. Say, okay, you can be Christian if you want, because he saw it was impossible to, eliminate them. So, then there was this other guy, Saint Paul. Saint Paul, he started to say, let's be a church of the idea of Jesus Christ. So he started to build this church. He started a political institution which is called the Roman Catholic Church, which is the longest life political institution we have, because right now is 2,000 years old. It's difficult to find a political institution which is so old. So, democracy was invented in antiquity, but then, for more than 1,000 years, you don't have democracy anymore. The same with republic, because republic it stopped existing, and then in the Middle Ages, in a certain moment of the Middle Ages, like in 1200, 1300, they started to have some small republic in some cities like Florence, Venice, and the Dutch cities, Amsterdam. They started to become republic again, but they have a long stop. 1,000 years they stopped. The Roman Catholic Church is an institution that remained the same, with the same leader, the Pope, with the same rules for 2,000 years. We don't have such a, old. So, some call this idea, we build up a hierarchy with different grade of power, and they say the leader of the local churches are the bishop, and the bishop of Rome is the Pope. Is the Pope, the leader of all leaders. You have spiritual hegemony, the Bishop of Rome, because the most important civilization was the Romans, so the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire. So Rome was the most important city in the world at the time, and they say the leader of the church in Rome is the leader of the church. And this church can be global, because for the first time, everybody can enter Christianity, So Jesus Christ was which religion was Jesus Christ? He started being a Jewish, but then he established a religion in which you can become a Christian in any moment. So it was very open ideas. So they wanted to build this universal church in which anybody can become part of the church, even the slaves, even the women that were excluded for so long. So it's the first idea that all human beings can enter this political institution. So this is why it kept growing. The Roman emperors kept killing Christians, but this idea was so strong because it was the first idea that human beings are equal and can all enter this, this community, this political community that is Christendom, that it kept growing for centuries. So after 300 years, the Roman emperor said, okay, it's legal. It's legal. You can be a Christian under the Roman Empire. The Roman Church was a growing institution, It was a new kind of institution. It became more and more important when the Roman Church the Catholic Church was growing and the Roman Empire was declining. So the Roman Empire said, yeah, it's better if we start to have a dialogue, if we start to use them. Okay? So in 378, the Roman Emperor Theodosius made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. In 312 years later, the Edict of Thessalonica made Catholicism the state church of the Roman Empire. Empire. We see that we had the situation in which at the beginning Christianity and the Roman Empire and the political authority they fight. But somehow then the political power incorporated the church, and then we moved towards, the fact that the church became the leader of politics. And they're gonna go towards the Holy Roman Empire led by the Catholic Church. So in the Middle Ages, we say we enter the Middle Ages 400 years after the birth of Christ. We enter the Middle Ages, and we enter 1,000 years in which the Roman Catholic Church is the most important political institution. You want to be a king? Yeah, you have to get the Pope. It's the Pope that will put the crown in your head. You want to be emperor? It's the Pope who has to say, yeah, you're the emperor. Because why are you emperor? Because of divine grace, because you have been chosen by God. So we have the Middle Ages is 1,000 years dominated by religion. Dominated by the religious idea, dominated by the church. The fact that it was so important is because Christian citizenship is the first universal citizenship that is open to the entire humankind. This was so powerful, so new, so able to go through the centuries. Something very new, so able to destroy the ancient civilization, which was based on this differentiation, first of all, between the slaves and the citizens. Was a civilization in which slavery was such an important institution. Let's see, for the entire Middle Ages, we will see only one political thinker, one political philosopher, to understand what was the ideology of the Middle Ages, and why the Middle Ages stopped doing political philosophy, stopped doing new political institutions. We have St. Augustine. He was a very early Christian, so he was obviously, he lived under the Roman Empire. It was pagan, because the Roman Empire had a religion that was paganism. He was a pagan, and then he became a Christian, but only in midlife, only in midlife, and he wrote this spiritual autobiography, the Confessions, in which he explains why he became a citizen. But what is very important for us is his book, The City of God, that made him one of the most influential political philosophers of all the time. Let's try to understand the political context. The political context of his age was, the Roman Empire was declining. It was a huge civilization built over centuries, through the beautiful ideas of the Greeks and through the beautiful institution, laws, and artifacts and architectural things made by the Romans. But this was declining. You had the barbarians coming from the north and destroying the Roman civilization. You have famine, you have plagues, you have diseases, epidemics, and so on. He wrote City of God to give an explanation why it's all coming, why there is so much violence, why there is so much devastation, what should we think about. So he wrote The City of God. The City of God. This is the idealist book which describes the perfect city. Like Plato, when he wrote the Republic, I wanted to describe the perfect city. So it's Neoplatonic, because he wanted to describe the perfect city. And he said, look, we see that there is so much violence, so much cruelty in the world, in the current world, because this world cannot be good. Cannot be good because it's corrupted by sins. Christians don't believe in the original sin by Adam and Eve, in which they eat the apple and condemn humanity to this suffering. So this material world is corrupted by sin. There is no chance. There is no chance. But there are two worlds, two cities. The earthly city, which is corrupted, which is this city in which we have to suffer. I'm sorry, but we have to suffer. Our destiny is to suffer. And then we have the heaven. The heaven is the kingdom of God, which is the perfect city in which we will not suffer anymore. Those of us who have been good, because you go to, you have to pass the judgment of God. So there is the original sin made by Adam and Eve, who condemned humankind to suffering. This is the Christian doctrine, He was going around and he was saying, we can see that all the world is populated by sins. Why? Because, sins it's the doctrine of Christ to say some things are sins. And it was going around that there were sins everywhere, There was people are greedy, people want more money, people want to enjoy the pleasure of the flesh, want sex, and there is violence everywhere, and there is war, and so on. So he said, because this is our destiny, is a world where sin is only present, So he said, like, my colleague Cicero, who wrote the Republic for Rome, it's good ideas, I like it, you have to be a good citizen, you have to be virtuous, and so on. But they say, it's a utopic approach, because this world is corrupted. So he said the ideas of people like Cicero, the ideas of people who promote the Republic as a good ideal, is worthy of respect, admiration, and loyalty. God is great, but for Augustine, he said, the state here, the life here cannot be good because this world is corrupted. So you understand that, and the good world can only be in heaven, can only be in the kingdom of Christ, can only be in the city of God. So he said, we respect the power of the emperor or whoever has political authority, but we don't believe this is the world where we can build the perfect political institution. Because the temporal world is condemned by the original sin and is inhabited by sinners. We need the state. Somehow we need it. We need because the state has coercion, and we have to regulate the bad tendency of the human beings. So we have to accept the state. We need the state. We need the political power. But this cannot be perfect. We cannot find a perfect form of government because the world is corrupted by sin. And because if we focus on the material world, on the material things, we will be corrupted because the sin is everywhere. Because this is the Christian doctrine. Okay? So, we will only find the just republic cannot be on this earth. So, Cicero looking for the perfect republic is wrong. We have to obey to the Roman Empire, but we have to recognize that there is a superior power, which is the Catholic Church, and which is the kingdom. So you understand that if this is the doctrine of Christianity, is not very much interested in building a perfect government, in building a perfect state. It's not very much interested in human affairs, because he thinks that the world is corrupted by sin. This is why in the Middle Ages we will not find very important political thinkers, because the situation is dominated by the Christian Church that believes that the world is corrupted and that we have to focus on the city of God. As far as we live in this world which is corrupted, there is no political institution we can find. This is why the Middle Age is not very much dominated by, with philosophy or ideas to improve society, because they only focus on theology. They only focus on theology. All the knowledge is given by the monks in the monastery, and so on and so forth. Let's say, because we will see this situation only today. The Middle Ages. What is the Middle Ages? It's a situation in which the Roman Catholic Church was the only big political institution. It was the only centralized and organized authority across Europe. And the only literate members of society were the clergy. The only one who was able to produce, to write, was the clergy, the priests, the monks. So religion became the touchstone of virtually all discourse, including political discussions. So politics was the result of religion somehow. Yeah, you had emperors, you had kings, but they say these are emperors and these are kings because of the will of God, because God decided. So there is only one person who can know what God decided. This person was the Pope, and you needed to be acknowledged by the Pope to become an emperor and to become a king. It was the Pope who needed to put the crown in your head in order for you to be a good, in order for you to be a ruler. And if the Pope say, yeah, you're excommunicato, you go away from the church, it was a big problem for you. In Europe, then also the kind of society, the cities crumbled, and the life, the social life became mostly a rural life. Agriculture was dominating with this circular time. Most of the population, they were peasants, and then you had the castles with some landlords who was, member of nobility, so you didn't have much more urban life, because when you live in the cities, you kind of, have trade, commerce, discussion, culture, and so on. No, it was mostly a rural society. The people were mostly peasants, and then you had the nobility. The nobility was decided by the clergy, the aristocracy, and they were saying, yeah, you are a landlord because you belong to this privileged class, which is recognized by the clergy. So there was the feudal Europe. The form, the organization of society was feudalism. You have lords, you have local lords of different hierarchies. Exactly. This was, politics. So politics, what was politics for this long time? Politics was just the result of religion, because you had just to follow the Christian principles. And the Pope was the one, and the clergy, the church was the one who was saying, yeah, you're following the good principles of Christianity, you're not following the principles of Christianity. We have this domination of religion over politics, and this stood for at least 1,000 years. 1,000 years. We entered modernity through a series of, we will enter modernity, as we will see in the next class, through a series of transformations who put in question, this primacy of religion over all other aspects of human existence. So what we will bring us from Middle Ages to modernity will be some changes in this primacy of the religion, which is first of all the fact that the Roman Catholic Church was split, because you had the Reformation. We had Martin Luther who said, yeah, we have to some changes. The church is corrupted. So I mean this big split in the church. We will see that this is a thing, that we have the scientific revolution, like Galileo, who said, yeah, it's not that you say Roman Catholic Church, that is the heart who's going around, which is the sun which is going around the heart, but it's the other way around. So we have some, and then they invented the printed things so that not only the monks and the clergy can read so we have some transformation which will bring us away from this total domination of religion over politics, of the church over the political institutions, and in way through which church will not be the only big political institution. This will take at least 300 years to enter, to get out from the Middle Ages. This will start, for example, from the Renaissance, which was an intellectual movement who rediscovered antiquity and to try to put the human being and not the God anymore at the center of the world. And so we have the Renaissance, we have different theories of the social contract, which we start to say the state theory is the result of a contract between the population and the king and not the decision of God. You remember that this is the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages is a situation in which politics is absolutely dominating religion. And we say, the other way. Religion is totally dominating over politics, and in which the most important institution is the Roman Catholic Church, and in which Roman Catholic Church say, yeah, you are a good Christian, so you can be a king. This mutual relationship between religion and politics is still nowadays an important thing, or not. So, but let's say, yeah, there is a country very important right now because we are discussing, right? What is the name of this country? What is its name? Islamic Republic. This means, first of all, you're Islamic, then you're a republic. So, who is the leader of the state in Iran? Is like the Pope of the Shia, right? So it's the Pope of the Shia who is the supreme leader Khamenei, who has been killed 2-3 days ago. So in Iran, for example, is a country in which they think that you have to make a kind of Islamic constitution, so that the constitution of your state must, comply with the Quran, right? This is, a situation. This is the situation we had somehow here in the Middle Ages, and then this took 3 centuries. Iran was also a secular country dominated by the Shia of Persia, but then, they made a revolution, and after this revolution, they said, no, we want to place Islamic ideas in power. Afghanistan, Afghanistan, you have the Taliban, they took power. They were invaded by the Soviet Union, they took power again, they were invaded by the Americans, then they took power again. This is a very, very, very complex topic because Western people, Western civilization, our civilization, Europeans and the Americans, our societies went through a slow process of secularization, because we have 1,000 years the church dominating the political life. We have 1,000 years in which the Roman Catholic Church was ruling over politics. But then, slowly, we got to the life, and we got rights, human rights. So we got a proper separation between politics and religion. This doesn't mean that we abolished religion, but we made a strong separation. Like if you go to the United States of America, people are very religious. But this only states as their private life. So you have freedom of religion. But that cannot, interfere with politics, because politics is secularized. Because politics have to rely on the interest of the state, on the interest of the people, on the social contract between the people and the state, and not on the divine laws of God, and not on the moral principles of your church. So we have a division. And this progressive division, we call it secularization. We thought that this was the way in which the entire world was going, But the situation was more complex, because in 1979, when we were talking that we were going in the direction of the secularization, for example, we had the revolution in Iran, and then the revolution ended in establishing an Islamic republic. The same is in Afghanistan. We think that the Afghanistani are happy to be secularized and free and have their own rights and women equality and so on, but then the Taliban is keeping taking control of the country with some level of support from the local population, and all the Islamic world it seems to resist this process of secularization. So we as Westerns, we have a linear idea of history that all countries must go in the same direction, but it looks a little bit more different. Like even let's talk about Turkey. Turkey, you have your founding father Atatürk. What did you do, Atatürk? What did he do? Yeah. So he knew. Atatürk knew that in order to get the control of the state, he needed to push the church and religion and religious powers away from the public life, and he has to make a separation. Indeed, he even made a law in which he was not allowed to go to public spaces with the hijab. He recognized it was an Islamic country, but he was not allowed to go there because he needed to secularize the country. So Turkey went through a process of secularization for decades, but then right now we know that they have gone to power and they started to say, we have to rely on our religious tradition and build mosques and so on. So, we have an idea as Westerns that we have a process of secularization because of this, because we went through 3,000 years away from the domination of the Roman Catholic Church over politics, and we got to the Enlightenment, and we got the French Revolution and the American Revolution, and we got through this process of secularization, and we think that also the rest of the world will go through the same, but what we are learning from the last decades is that there is not linear process.